House of EdTech, episode 83.
Hey, I'm Miles, and you're listening to the House of EdTech with my daddy, Chris Nessie.
Support for this episode of the House of EdTech comes from summerpd.com. Expand your knowledge of Google Classroom, apps, formative assessments, and much more. Summerpd.com offers 10 courses that you can get for just $25 when you use the coupon code House of EdTech. Sign up now to access the courses for professional development on your schedule, and thank you to summerpd.com for all your support. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Christopher Nessie, and the House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. My objectives include discussing technology that is changing our classrooms and schools and sharing tools and tips that you can hear about today and use tomorrow. I talk to teachers, leaders, and creators just like you and have them share their stories. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way we teach and how our students learn. Welcome to episode 83 of the House of EdTech podcast. I am so glad that you are joining me for this episode. If this is your first time listening, thank you so much. I'm glad you discovered the podcast. If you could take a minute and send a tweet and let me know how you discovered it, that would be really cool. And then I would know. And then we could be friends, and you could say, oh, I know this guy who does this awesome podcast, and that would be a lot of fun. If you are a longtime listener, thank you so much for coming back and continuing to make the House of EdTech a part of your anytime, anywhere professional development. I really sincerely appreciate that. And I know I don't say that enough. So again, thank you. Coming up in this 83rd episode of the podcast, I have my EdTech thought, and today we're going to be talking about SMART goals. I have an EdTech recommendation. Strike that, reverse it, Willy Wonka that. I have some EdTech recommendations. I have something fun for your Mac, something for social studies teachers, and a recommendation to keep you focused and on task when you're working in the Google Chrome browser. No episode of this podcast is complete without the House of EdTech VIP, and if you're new to the program, that is my recommendation of a person who you should be connected with, that I am also connected with, and you could learn from them, they could learn from you, and so goes the circle of being connected in the world of education. My featured content today is a conversation I recently had with Lynn Smargis. You might remember Lynn for her appearance on episode 75 of the podcast, where she talked about coding in the elementary school classroom. If you missed that episode, you can go to chrisnessie.com/75 and you can check that out as well. But Lynn shares today some great information and recommendations for how you can write technology grants and put yourself in a great position to get some funding for your EdTech dreams in your classroom. Before we get to the featured segments of this episode, just a couple of announcements here up front. One, a lot of you have begun to discover and become a part of the House of EdTech Facebook group, and we're building community there. I'm putting little things, we're having some discussion, and I'm enjoying it, and I think you would too. It's free because it's on Facebook, so if you're interested in becoming a part of the House of EdTech community, go to chrisnessie.com/Facebook, and you'll be able to connect with myself and all the other people who enjoy this podcast. The second announcement I have is I have swag available. I'm very excited as I sit here in the studio, which you can't see because you're listening to a podcast, but I'm holding in my hand, I'm looking down at some new House of EdTech swag. There are now t-shirts available for the podcast, some sweatshirts, a mug, stickers, different little things that you can show your support of the podcast, and you can look good doing it. If you're interested in purchasing a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a mug, anything like that, just go over to chrisnessie.com/shop shop. And that'll take you to my little store where you can check out the gear, and hope to see you wearing t-shirts and drinking coffee and tea and tweeting about it and all those wonderful things. And of course, that all helps to make the podcast go round and support what I'm doing here on the show. And now, my EdTech thought. For this episode's EdTech thought, I thought I would share with you the idea of SMART goals and 3 steps that you could take to implement SMART goals in your life or your classroom. To start, the acronym SMART, S-M-A-R-T, stands for Specific, Measurable, Achievable, Relevant, Time-Boxed Goals. Now, if you want to get stuff done, you have to stay focused. One way to do that, work with smaller milestones. For example, instead of making a list of all your goals for the school year, break it down to what you want to focus on in each marking period, semester, or trimester, and then focus on the coming period of time. And this 3-step system can help you do this. Step 1. Find your focus areas. The first step is to come up with 3 focus areas, which are just 3 goals you want to accomplish in the immediate future. For example, these might be read more, exercise more, stop eating so much junk food, etc. Write down each goal and separate them. Step 2. Clarify the criteria for success. You need to ask yourself, how will you know if you've reached your goal in the focus area? If your goal is to read more books, for example, your criteria might be to finally get through, say, War and Peace, or finish all the books you got for Christmas. You'll clarify the criteria for each goal, then write down the criteria under each focus area. And step 3, lay out your action steps. In this next step, you'll add the action-oriented tasks that you'll take to reach each goal. Going back to the book example, it might be to read 1 chapter a day. Add these tasks to each month's focus area. Then create a due date for completing the step. By clarifying your criteria, you're going to be ensuring your goals are specific and measurable. When you list your tasks, you ensure that they are realistic and actionable. And by breaking your goals out into smaller chunks of time, you ensure that these goals are time-based. And that's the idea. You want to be successful? Here's a way you can consider breaking down the things you want to do and the goals you want to achieve. So consider these 3 steps and adding the SMART model to your personal and professional development and what you want to do. If you're a SMART goal creator and you do this already, I'd love to hear your feedback and how it works for you. You can leave a comment in the show notes for this episode at chrisnessy.com/83, or you can send a tweet or an email or Vox, and I would love to hear from you and share your thoughts in a future episode. And that is my EdTech thought. For this episode's EdTech recommendation, again, I have 3 things as I mentioned at the top of the show. So the first recommendation, you can get the Apple TV screensavers for your Mac. Now, if you're an Apple TV user, you know what I'm talking about. The screensavers on the Apple TV are gorgeous. They are scenes from around the world that they look like they were shot either by helicopter or drone, and they are just these beautiful, high-definition flyovers of many places all around the world. In the United States, there's San Francisco, New York, Chicago, worldwide, Tokyo, Dubai, just to name a couple. But these are beautiful. But they're only available on the Apple TV. Until now. I'm going to include a link in the show notes for this episode from Quartz, which is QZ.com, and it tells you how you can get these Apple TV aerial flyover screensavers on your Mac laptop or your desktop. So I actually did this on my Mac Mini in my living room, and sometimes I will purposely let the videos stop playing and let the computer, rest and have that lapse just so I can see these awesome screensavers come up and see the video. They are gorgeous. And if you've never seen them, Google them. I'm sure you can see some videos on YouTube of these flyovers, and then you will truly be inspired to make them a part of your screen saving experience. The second recommendation I have in this episode is specifically for social studies teachers, or perhaps you are a history buff and interested in the Great War or World War I. I want to recommend to you the Great War YouTube channel. The Great War channel shows you the history of the First World War in the 4 years from 1914 to 1918, we're exactly in this 100 years ago period. The host, Indy Nidell, takes you back week by week and shows you what was going on in the past. You'll learn more about the Allies and the Central Powers, the emperors, Winston Churchill, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, all about the soldiers, the battles, the technology, and life outside the battlefields. You can subscribe to the channel, and you will get a new video every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. This is a fantastic channel. I've been using it in the social studies classroom, which, just to sneak it in, I've returned to the social studies classroom, so I'm no longer in ISS. And if you have questions about that, you can leave a comment on the show notes. But I found this great channel, and I wanted to recommend it and share it with as many people as I can. And what better place to do that than right here on the House of EdTech? My third recommendation is Momentum, and this is a Chrome extension. Momentum is a personal dashboard designed to eliminate distraction and provide inspiration, focus, and productivity. Momentum replaces the new tab page in your Chrome browser with a personal dashboard featuring a to-do list, the weather, and really beautiful, inspirational background images. You can get this for your browser at momentum-.com, and those are my 3 recommendations for this episode of the podcast. The featured content for this episode is a recent conversation I had with Lynn Smargis. The interview that I'm going to be playing back for you is a conversation where we talk about how best to secure EdTech grants, a couple of strategies, and it's really great conversation. I do want to preface it, and I typically don't apologize here on the show, but I do want to apologize. The sound quality on the interview is not up to my normal standards. I used Zencastr. Just to pull back the curtain a little bit, I used Zencastr to record this conversation, and there was, for some reason, when I went back to listen to it and edit it down, just a lot of background noise and hum, and neither one of us sound as good as we did when we were actually having the conversation. I don't have an explanation why, but I did my best to clean it up, and if this is your first time listening to the show, normally the interviews do sound better than this, and I will do better next time, but I did the best I could to clean up the audio. So here is my conversation with Lynn Smargis. All right, as I said at the top of this episode, we are going to be talking about how to write a winning technology grant. And I'd like to welcome back to the podcast Lynn Smargis. Lynn was my guest on episode number 75 of the podcast, and she shared her insight and expertise on coding in elementary schools. Now, if you haven't heard that episode, be sure to go back and check out episode number 75 at chrisnessy.com/75. And Lynn is back with me to share more of her knowledge, and today we are talking about writing a winning technology grant. Welcome back to the House of EdTech, Lynn Smargis. How are you, Lynn?
Thanks. I am doing well. Thanks for having me back.
It is a pleasure, and we had so much fun last time talking. Your energy was great, and full disclosure, you reached out to me and said, hey, I'd love to talk about this, and I'm no dummy, so when people want to come on the show and talk about something that they know about, who am I to say no?
Well, it's funny because the grant writing process, it seems so scary, but it's actually pretty easy. And there's so much money out there that you can get for your classroom.
And that's, as teachers, that's what we're all looking for, that next dollar, and how can we make our classrooms that much better. But before we dive into that, what's going on with you? And anything new? What's going on since we've last spoken?
Since we've last spoken, let's see. I recently got accepted into the EdTech Team Summit for Google in Arizona, which is next week. So I'm super excited. I'm going to be talking about coding and Nearpod. I'm going to be doing 2 different sessions on that for next week. This week, I'm going to be at HoET083 doing the same 2. I'm going to be doing Nearpod and coding at HoET083, and I'm also going to be in the playground showcasing Nearpod as well. So the next couple weeks is big time conference week. So I'm super excited about going to both of those conferences. HoET's been one, it's a really big one in Utah, and HoET stands for the Utah Coalition of Education Technology. And so this is my 3rd year speaking there. And I'm also this year running for as a board member. So, or running to be a board member. So, by the time you guys listen to this, I would either known if I am a board member or not a board member by April. But, I'm pretty excited to, hopefully I'll be able to get on the board of HoET as well.
I think you're doing what, like 30 or 40 different sessions at HoET?
No, this year I'm doing 2. Last year I made the mistake. I put in 5 proposals and they accepted all 5. And then I ended up doing 5 sessions in 2 days and was completely exhausted by Friday. But it was a lot of fun. And this year I see people at different other conferences and they're like, I know you from HoET. And it's like, well, that's probably because I did 5 sessions last year, and I'm sure you've been to at least one of them. So, but it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of notoriety being at HoET. Because it's a really popular Utah tech conference.
It is very popular, and you will be one of 2 people who I know who are there. So you have to make me a promise right here, right now, that you will see my good friend Derek Larson, who you also know.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys have to take a House of EdTech guest selfie and post it and tag it and share it.
Oh, we will totally we'll take selfies in several different areas and post it and hashtag it with House of EdTech.
So one of the things that you mentioned when we started talking about this topic is that you are you're not just really good. You're like an all-star grant writer. And I believe your stats, you are 6 for 7 in the last 2 years?
I'm 6 for 7 grants in the last 2 years, yeah.
So what types of things have you written grants for?
I've written grants, I think all of them except one for technology. The one that was not technology was DonorsChoose.org, and one of my colleagues had told me about Donors Choose and kind of guided us through the thing. And so I put in for that, and I got a whole class set of science books, which were, I think it was like $600 or $700, because I got like a class set of science books, and then I got like little book, shelves to put them in and stuff like that. And the kids really enjoyed it. We did a couple of really cool and creative projects, cross-curricular project-based learning stuff with it as well, which is a lot of fun. Very
cool. Now, in your estimation, approximately have you been able to get in grant money in those 6 grants you were successful with?
Just a little over $11,000.
That's fantastic.
It's pretty crazy. Like, I never thought when I wrote my first grant that I would ever be making this much money. And it's kind of fun. It's kind of like a game now. So now it's like, how much can I get this time? Or what can I, what kind of grants can I get? Or how much money can I get? Or it's kind of fun. It's kind of like, it's almost like gambling. It's like I can put it out there and see if I can get it. And that one that I didn't get, I was actually really disappointed because I was on a big roll that year. So But it's actually not very hard. It's pretty easy to do. And you just have to know what to write and what to say.
And I think that's going to come up in our, I don't necessarily know if we've put together a step-by-step, but we definitely have some tips that you've put together.
Oh, for sure.
Now, to start off, a lot of people, they hear the word grant, or really they hear the word writing, and they freak out.
Yes.
So for people who think that this is an insurmountable thing, let's dispel that rumor.
For sure. When I first thought of grant writing, I used to think, oh, it's going to take me I was picturing 10 hours of writing, and then there's going to be thousands of people applying for the grant, and I'd have a really small chance of getting it, and I would be spending all this time, and it was going to be really hard, and it would be pages and pages of work. And it really isn't. Like, I was really surprised how easy it is to write a grant. And of course, it depends on the grant. Like, some grants are like, you have to write 2 or 3 pages. But 3 pages is the most I've ever written for a grant. And I got that done in like 3 hours, and I made over $4,000. So for like making $4,300 for 3 hours of time is a pretty good per hour rate.
And it goes right to the kids. So that's the plus here.
Right, for sure. Yeah. And it's actually, so grant writing is not the crazy thing that you think it might be. It's actually a lot easier than most people think. It's like, it's like anything that we fear. It's actually a lot worse in our head than it actually is when we do it. So yeah, it's actually not as bad of a process as you think it is. And a lot of grants will give you like boxes, and you just have to answer a specific question in a box. So, you don't have to be an amazing writer to write a grant. You can just, if you have basic writing skills, you can totally do it.
Sounds good. So we've established here in the last couple of minutes that it's not an arduous process. It could take as little as an hour, but it's definitely not going to take weeks or months. Although, again, something that's super huge might take a little longer.
Right.
Now,
exactly.
There are so many grants out there. What is your advice for choosing the grant to apply for, or grants?
So what I would suggest is look for ones that are local first. So, for instance, I believe a couple of our science museums give grants in the Salt Lake area. So we're in the Salt Lake City area, right outside of Salt Lake City. And I know our school district does a grant, and that's 2 of the grants I won this year were from we have a nonprofit organization that supports our school district. So those 2 grants I got were from there this year. And
like an education foundation kind of thing?
Right, exactly. Yep, it's an education foundation. And so I would look for local ones first, because a lot of times local ones, not a lot of people are applying for them. So you have a better chance of getting your grant if you're doing something that's local. So like, for instance, there's an outlet center over here. It's called Tanger Outlets, and they're doing a grant proposal right now. And apparently they only have maybe, I think, from what I heard, like a dozen people apply for the grant, and they've got like, I think $25,000 to give away. So I would suggest doing something local first if you can find it. And so work from small up. And so if you can find some local grant that does education, and then go from there. Like Donors Choose is a great place to start, because it's kind of like the pre-fill in the boxes thing. And then you would market it to like on social media to like the parents and stuff like that. So when I marketed my Donors Choose grant, I put it out there. I put it on my class website. I sent it home in newsletters, and I had a lot of grandparents that were giving money for that. So you never know who's going to give money. So just assume that anybody could, and don't ever assume that someone's not.
Right. Never assume, and we don't have to explain that any further.
Exactly.
And Donors Choose is like the original Kickstarter for education, really, right?
Right, it is. And it's really easy to go on that website and apply for it. And then at the end, depending on what the donors ask for, you may have to write a thank you letter. I think you do have to take pictures of the kids doing work, just not their faces and stuff, and send it into them so that they can see that you did, finalize the grant and actually do the activity that you said you would do with the grant. But it's really super easy process. It's the easiest grant process writing I've been through. And you just have to like write thank you letters. It's super easy. They give you a timeline. They outline everything. It's super clear. It's a really great place to start. So I would start at like a Donors Choose, grant or like a local grant somewhere locally that's giving out money for schools.
Okay. Now the next thing that we have here, you titled Creating Your Grant Topic and your title and topics to avoid. Can you use some of your examples to expand on that and what that really means when we're talking about topics and titles?
Yes. So you want your topic to be something like exciting and catchy. So for instance, one of the grants I got this year was, so the purpose of the grant was to get some Pi Seed computers. And if you don't know what Pi Seed computers are, they're these like little computers that house Raspberry Pis, which are basically like a little computer board that you can do a lot of stuff with. And so the purpose of getting these was my 4th grade class that I teach coding to is going to code on the Pi Seeds, and then they're going to make like a music symphony, like for a spring music festival. And so instead of just saying coding with Sonic Pi, which is kind of boring, the music teacher and I got together, we collaborated, and we came up with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti code. Coding.
That's cute. I like it.
Yeah. And so it is really catchy. And so you come up with something that gets your attention. So it's like, when your English teacher always told you come up with a catchy, like, introductory line to your essay. That's basically it. Like, think of something that and it can be crazy. It can be silly. Think of something that just sounds really catchy and cool, and run it by some people. And that's what I always do. I always bounce this off the people, like at the lunchroom or whatever, and ask them what they think and get their opinion. If you get a lot of people saying that they like it, then use it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What is, besides the one you just mentioned about do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti code? Mm-hmm. What is another creative one that you've come up with?
The other one I got this year was actually I got the idea from your podcast. I can't remember what number podcast it was, but it was your guest that did the AR VR, and you had all the links from her podcasts on your site. And so I went and clicked on them and was playing around with some of them, and I really liked Quiver. And so one of my Spanish, we're a complete dual immersion school, and one of my Spanish teachers came up to me and she said, oh, you know what I really need is that because there's not a lot of Spanish material out there. She says, I need a Spanish writing prompt. And I was like, oh my gosh, her name is Fanny. I was like, Fanny, you've got to let's write a grant for this Quiver VR thing. And, I said, what we can do is just and so anyway, we decided to write the grant, and instead of just putting VR for Spanish, we put Quiver, what was it? We put Quiver VR in Espanol. And so just thinking of it's kind of like decorating your house. Your house is okay if you have just plain white walls, but it's so much nicer with color.
The episode that you're referring to, that was Katie Ann Wilson from episode 70.
Yes, because she was a few episodes before the last time I was here.
Yes, and still one of the very popular episodes alongside of yours. Not gonna lie.
That's okay. AR and VR is just really hot right now, and I'm trying to get more into doing that with the kids.
Nice. So good examples there. So I guess so let's recap it real quick so far. So it's not as hard as people might think to write a grant. They need to be able to choose grants that are appropriate, and your best advice there is to start local, which could be Donors Choose, or maybe something right in your own district, and then kind of go out from there. And then creating a catchy title, topic, grab people's attention, make them want to read it, make them want to give you and your kids the money. Next up, we have the nitty-gritty, which is how to get technology with a grant. What is your advice here?
So my advice here is don't ask for iPads. Don't ask for computers. What you need to do is come up with a really creative way that you need to use those items, because without those items, you couldn't do whatever that creative project-based learning or, inquiry-based project is. So, for example, one of my ideas I came up with, which was actually the first grant I ever wrote and received, was a grant for iPad microscopes. I really wanted to get iPad microscopes for my kids, and I'm like, well, how can I get a set of iPad microscopes, because they're pretty expensive. It was I think the grant ended up coming out to $4,100 for just a class set. And, so I was thinking, I got it. So what we came up with for the idea for the grant, or what I came up with, was that, we have a cave over here. It's called Timpanogos Cave, and I think it's a national monument. And so anyway, what we came up with the idea was we were going to take a field trip there. And the kids are going to learn some about the geology and the history from the social studies teacher, because it was going to be the whole grade level would go. And then we would take the kids into the cave, and you can go in 16 at a time, and then they would take samples inside the cave and then bring them back, put them on a petri dish, and then analyze them and look at them under the iPad microscopes. And so that was the whole idea. And the guy that came in when I got awarded the grant was this was one of the coolest ideas we've ever seen, is to do this. And so I didn't ask for just iPad microscopes. I asked for iPad microscopes because with those, we could have a whole class set of microscopes in order to look at the bacteria that we were going to grow and culture from going into the caves and taking samples from the caves and bringing them back with us.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just, don't ask for the stuff. You're really presenting your idea and the stuff will support that idea.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And just like the virtual reality, the VR and Espanol grant I got this year. So when my Spanish teacher came in and said, I need something for a writing prompt, I thought, oh my gosh, VR is perfect for a writing prompt. So, our grant was for $400. That was actually the smallest grant I've received. And, it was for buying 30 licenses for Quiver in education so that we could have that app and the kids would be able to, and the teacher would be able to download all of the pages from that Quiver in education. And then what we're doing is, and we just went did the training on this today, is that she's going to have the kids color the picture. And then they have specific vocabulary words they need to use. And they're doing, I think on animals for science. And then so they're going to write their vocabulary words in a box underneath the picture. And then what they're going to do is do a Venn diagram and compare and contrast the two animals that are on the picture. And then they're going to write a little paragraph about it. And then after they do that, then they're going to scan the picture with the Quiver VR app. And then they're going to add more to their compare and contrast Venn diagram and then add some more vocabulary words based on what they can see with how the animals move. And they're doing all of this in Spanish because it's the Spanish side of the dual immersion. So it's not specifically just the app. It's like how you're using the app. And then you also want to do cross curriculum. So like a really big one is science and writing or science and reading. So if you can incorporate science and writing or science and reading, I mean, even if you're an English teacher, you can still incorporate science into it. So if you're not a typical technology based subject, that doesn't mean that you can't incorporate technology. You can actually team up with like your science or your STEM teachers and write a grant together. Which is also helpful if you're writing your first grant because it's like kind of like working out. It's always better if you're doing it with somebody else. It doesn't feel as bad. And so you can, team up with another member of like a science base, like math, and do something with like math and writing or math and writing and reading, or you can do like a science, math and writing. And so the more you can incorporate and the more into your grant, the better chance you have of getting it.
No wonder you're 6 out of 7. Part of me wants to know how you didn't get the 7th one.
I don't know. I was wondering that too.
So, I mean, right there, you have to summarize those, what you just said, basically. To get the grant, focus on what you're going to have the kids do. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter really the stuff or the object or, the device, as we've said here before. And then you've also mentioned basically tell these people who are going to read this, tell them what they want to hear. Now, when I first read that, I was a little like, I kind of made like a crooked face at it because it's like, it seems to go against like what you tell, like it seems to go against what we kind of do as teachers, but right. Here it totally makes sense. But you framed it in a way that, again, it's not about the stuff. It's about that bigger, broader, how is this going to impact student learning, which I think is very important. And then obviously, connecting it to your curriculum and then going cross-curricular, basically you're putting together almost, it seems like a lesson plan where how could they say no? And again, I'm sorry they did that one time.
That's okay. Hey, you can't win them all the time. So yeah. And that's exactly it. Like, for example, one of the other grants that I received was for a grant for a field trip. And, it wasn't just like a regular. So what I did, another thing you want to do too, when you're doing this is the more curriculum standards you can tie into the grants, the more likely they are to give you the grant. So like, for instance, I went through, one of the places I always wanted to bring my kids was, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a science center where like you go in and you have the experience of being in a spaceship, and then everybody is a part of the crew and everybody has a certain job to do. And then you have a mission and you are part of a space crew in a spaceship, and it's this whole simulation where you go through the whole thing. And it's like a 2-hour long thing, and it was really, really cool. And so what I did was part of our integrated science for 6th grade was astronomy. So I went in and found every every flippin' science curriculum standard that would apply towards outer space that I could use that we would learn in this experience. And I put it on there. And then I also went through and found the reading and writing standards because the kids had to do logs. We were going to come back and write a summary reflection on it and do some other stuff, some other writing assignments along with this. And so I took every reading and writing standard that applied to this and put it into that grant as well. So I literally had I can't remember, it was 15 or 17 standards that the kids would learn doing this activity for this field trip that I was writing the grant for. And when I got that grant, it was really funny because my colleague Beth and I were actually out sitting at a diner, eating because we were out working on our, I was running the advisory class at my school at the time. And so her and I would collaborate and get together in a diner and work for 3 hours. And all of a sudden we see my principal and a whole bunch of people from the district office, walking in with balloons and flowers. And I looked at my friend Beth and I said, I think I got that grant I wrote last month. And they come in and they give it. And so they said it was the most creative grant idea that they had seen come into the district. And that was another district grant. And so you want to definitely tie in a bunch of curriculum as much as you can. Now, obviously don't put something in there that does not apply. You don't want to do that. But anything that you can put in there, definitely do. And definitely use your other colleagues as resources. Ask if you can't find your, the English teacher's curriculum or you're not really familiar with it, just go in and ask them, talk to them at lunch and say, hey, can I meet up with you for 15, 20 minutes after school? Cause I'm doing this grant proposal and I just need to find out where the curriculum is or more about it so that I know what to put in there. So for me, I was really lucky because my district had reading and writing curriculum standards underneath the science one, so I knew which ones applied for 6th grade. So definitely use your colleagues as resources. Definitely use curriculum standards. The more standards you can put in there, the better for sure. So that they can see that the kids are actually learning stuff that's in your curriculum and you're not just doing it for fun. But of course you're doing it for fun because who wants to go doing something that's not fun, right?
Absolutely. So Lynn and I have been having a fantastic conversation, and really it's been one-sided because she is clearly the expert here. Full disclosure, I have never applied for a grant, but I can tell you right now, the next one that comes my way, I do feel that everything you've talked about and shared really simplifies the process. And I'm one of those people who thought it was scary and took a lot of writing and, really how do you go about doing it? So first, thank you for taking the time to share these great strategies. And again, to quickly recap them, it's not as hard as you think, which I now subscribe to. Start local, start small, come up with something creative to title your grant, and don't use things like, I want smart boards or I want exercise balls and beanbag chairs for my classroom. When you want to get technology, it's not about the technology. It's about what the students will do and learn and experience as a result of having the technology, which they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Basically, it sounds like tell a good story. You wrote here, give them some meaty information to chew on, get the people who are approving the grant to, I think, be just as excited as you are as the teacher. Make it connect to your curriculum, make it cross-curricular, rely on your colleagues, collaborate, which again is promoting all of these wonderful things that we like to talk about in education. Writing grants really puts that process ahead of you. Again, since we're talking about basically free money, there's still a catch. So I don't want to say that there are negatives, but there are some other things to consider that you've shared here, Lynn. So why don't we talk about the things that before we go rushing out to apply for all these grants, what are some things that we should be thinking about before we jump into this?
Yeah. So one of the big ones that a lot of teachers either don't know information about or are unsure about or think that if I get this grant, this will be fine, is internet access. So a lot of schools, depending on your internet access, you might not have internet access to support what you're doing. So definitely check on that. Check with your tech people at your school, your IT people. Another one people don't consider is software and software updates. And so how often does that software update? And sometimes, for instance, we have in our school, one of the school districts I worked in, we had these Lego robots, and these Lego robots, the last update they had was in 2006. And so they hadn't updated those old robots since then. So you want to consider, I would say a lot of some technology, EdTech companies specifically don't update their software very often. So check and see when their last update was. If it hasn't been within the past 6 months to a year, I would say stay away from that product and don't ask for that product, because that means they're probably not going to update it. And if they don't update it, it's not going to stay, it's not going to function well with especially with kids trying to use it. So I would stay away from anything that the software update isn't current. Also compatibility. Like if you are look at what you're getting. So like for instance, some things only work on iPads. Some things only work on desktop computers. You have to consider what it works on and what it doesn't work on. So for instance, if you wanted to do some project, like for instance, like with Scratch Junior, like one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm working with my second and third graders, and we just finished up a storyboarding unit with Scratch Junior. And so they drew their storyboard out and then they made their story. But suppose you wanted to add a field trip to that. Okay. And so if you want to add a field trip to that, and then they draw a story and then do that on Scratch Junior, well, Scratch Junior can't be used on the computer. So if you guys have laptops in your school and you want to do Scratch Junior, it's not going to happen. You have to have iPads to use it. So you definitely have to consider what platforms your software is on. Another thing you want to see is renewal cost of programs, because sometimes you buy a program and it's good for a year. And so you get to the next year and then you plan on using it again and it's expired. And if you're not going to pay for it and your school's not going to pay for it, if your district's not going to pay for it, then you're kind of stuck. So definitely check and see if there's any renewal costs associated with that, because some licenses are only for a year and some things you just buy straight out. So definitely see if there's any renewal costs, and or if the product that you're buying has like some kind of a limited, like you have this many features for 30 days, and then if you want to continue, you have to buy more. Or for instance, if you buy something, if the features that are in that package are what you really need, or if you actually need more or need less. So like, what are the features you really need and you think you're really going to use, and what are the features you're not going to use? And so make sure you purchase the package that's appropriate for your use and your purpose of what you're using it for. And then again, definitely always check with the IT. So if you are not very versed in technology, check with your IT before you put that grant in, because I've heard of a couple teachers in our school district that I'm currently working in that have applied for grants. They've gotten the stuff and they weren't able to use the robots because the software wasn't compatible with our system that we were using. So they had to build the robots, but the kids weren't able to program them or do anything else fun with them. So definitely consider all of those things before you apply for the grant, because some teachers have gotten caught with like applying for the grant and they get the stuff and they think and it seems all great, but then when they actually go to use it, they find these little snafus in there. So definitely check with all those things before you apply for your grant, so you know what you're buying and if it's compatible, and if your IT department can integrate it with what you have currently with your platform and your internet access and all that good stuff.
Lynn, you are the Michael Jordan of grants.
I don't know about that. I just read them enough to know what to do.
Thank you for giving us this inside look at really, again, I came into this conversation thinking, yeah, grants are probably really tough and man, that who's going to get them? But you've dispelled a lot of the rumors. And I mean, for everybody that's listening, go out and apply for a grant. Again, the last point that Lynn made, very important. Take into consideration some of these other outlying factors that could impact whether or not you can actually make it a reality. But if everything checks out, there's no reason why everybody shouldn't be applying for at least one grant a year, if not more, depending on when certain programs are available. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Oh, you're welcome, Chris. Yeah, and I would definitely encourage everybody to at least try one grant a year. And if you don't get it, that's fine. Just try a different one the next year. But, I mean, for the time you put into it for your 1 to 3 hours, you can get anywhere from like, a few $100s to a few $1,000s. It is totally worth your time, because I don't know any teacher out there that makes $300 an hour.
It has to definitely be worth your time, because I think, and I don't do a lot of live math, but I think we can safely say that you will miss out on 100% of the grants you do not apply for.
Right. And the other thing that I didn't mention too is that when kids find out that you have actually written, like my one grant that I did with the iPad microscopes, I was telling the kids that I won a grant, and they're like, well, what's that? And I was explaining it to them, and I said, guys, this is why writing is so important. Like, if I did not have good writing skills, I wouldn't have been able to get this grant. So it just kind of reinforces, like, what they're learning in school is important, especially with writing and reading. And so I explained that to them, and they thought that was really cool that, you know, if you have good writing skills, you can make money.
Amazing. It's the fact that obviously getting the grant gives something back to the kids. The entire process is a teachable moment.
Yes, it surely is. And the kids were always, every time I got a grant, the kids were always excited about using whatever it was that we got. And it was always a really great learning experience. I've never received products from a grant and the kids did not have a really great experience from it. So I've been really happy with all of the grants that I did have received.
Awesome. And anything you're currently going to be planning to apply for? Or maybe you don't want to tip it off so more people aren't applying for it.
No, actually, I was going to apply for the Tanger grant, but then the deadline is March 16th, which is also the first day of USA, and I still haven't finished my presentations yet. So I kind of need to get that done first.
All right. All right. So 6 out of 8.
So yeah. Well, I'm not applying for that one, so that one doesn't count. But the one I actually just got my stuff for is my Sonic Pi. I just got the Pi seeds in on Friday. And so I just unpacked everything and put it on my shelf, and I was taking some pictures of it. So if you go to my Twitter feed at Lynn Smargis, I'll be posting some pictures of the Pi seeds for Pi Day tomorrow. Well, tomorrow you guys aren't, it's April, but you can still go to my Twitter feed and see the pictures of the Pi seeds and the speakers and everything that I got from my last grant.
I will grab those tweets with the pictures and I will put them in the show notes for this episode.
Great. Sounds good.
Awesome. Lynn, thank you so much for taking some time here to share your inside information and your expertise. I know the audience will greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Chris. I am glad to always share whatever I can do to help out our educational community. All
righty. So will you come back again later in 2017?
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you so much once again, Lynn, for taking time to be on the podcast and sharing your experience and your insight into grant writing. And hopefully those of you listening, you will be inspired to, one, go out and pursue some grants and some funding for your classroom dreams and aspirations. And of course, if you have other tips or recommendations, please leave a comment in the show notes at chrisnessy.com/83 or tweet them out, tag myself, tag Lynn on Twitter, and share what you're doing to get grants and funding for your classroom as well. Now, let's find out who this episode's House of EdTech VIP is. For the second time in the history of the podcast, I am proud to announce that this VIP is a colleague of mine. The first was Mr. Jamie Joshua, who is a math teacher, and this VIP is also a math teacher at New Brunswick High School, right here in New Jersey. And I want to say congratulations, you are the House of EdTech VIP to Mr. Joe Juba. Joe Juba is a second-year math teacher at the high school. He is a class advisor. He is a soccer coach. He is passionate about growing in education and making an impact in education. Since I've transitioned back into the social studies classroom at the high school, Joe and I have the same prep, and we've been having some fantastic conversations. I've been helping him with integrating some technology into his classroom, and he is, and I'm not going to embarrass you here, Joe, but Joe is a sponge. He wants to soak up and learn as much as he can. He is relatively new to Twitter, so you listen to this podcast, I need you to go out and make Joe feel welcome on Twitter. I actually recently helped him rebrand himself on Twitter, and his handle is at bowtiejoe23, because Joe Juba is all about the bow tie, and he is one of the most professionally dressed to the nines educators that I've ever worked with. He's also into flipped learning, and he is trying to attend more conferences and put himself out there and grow, and again, like a sponge, soak up as much as possible. So he would be a valuable member to your PLN, and you would be a welcomed member to his now growing and expanding PLN. So once you follow bowtiejoe23 on Twitter, let them know that I sent you, tag the House of EdTech, and hey, Joe Juba, congratulations. You are the House of EdTech VIP. Thank you for checking out this episode, number 83 of the House of EdTech. Thank you once again to summerpd.com for supporting this episode, and make sure you use promo code House of EdTech to get $10 off your order and bundle all of their courses together, again for just $25. It's a fantastic deal. Let's keep the conversation going. Go visit the show notes for this episode. Go to chrisnessy.com/83, leave a comment, or send me a message by going to chrisnessy.com/feedback. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on the information and resources that I shared in this episode and every episode. Now, if we're not connected on Twitter, we should be. It's the fastest way to connect with me and communicate with me. I'm very responsive. My username is Mr. Nessie, MRNESI, and use the hashtag House of EdTech so I see your tweets. Now, if you enjoy the podcast, thank you so much. I'd like you to do me a couple of favors. First, tell somebody about the podcast on Twitter and tag me and use the hashtag. Number 2, rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Your honest rating and positive review will help to keep the podcast front and center for other educators to discover and enjoy. You could also become an awesome supporter of the podcast. I'd like to thank Jen Giffen, Peggy George, Mark Grindell, Dan Gallagher, and Jeff Herb and Brent Warner for all of their support. If you're interested, go to chrisnessy.com/awesome and you could become an awesome supporter of the show. The next episode of the House of EdTech, number 84, which is only 16 away from 100. I cannot wait. Episode 84 is going to come out on April 16th, 2017. Again, before I go, I would like to invite you to join the House of EdTech Facebook group. Just go to chrisnessy.com/Facebook, join the group, hang out with me, ask questions, leave feedback. It's a lot of fun over there. And again, if you're interested in picking up some House of EdTech gear, t-shirts, sweatshirt, mugs, stickers, just go to chrisnessy.com/shop. And that's where you can get all of the cool gear. That's really it. I'm just kind of letting the music. There's the saxophone. Ah, man. I got to tell you real quick here. I mean, you're listening. I love podcasting. It is the best. I wish I could do more. I wish I could do this weekly. That would be fun. But anyway, until next time, thank you for learning with me. And remember, using technology is not difficult. Just give it a try. The House of EdTech is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more, go to edupodcastnetwork.com.